Coming up in today's newscast, the streets of Tel Aviv are brought to a standstill as Ethiopian-Israeli-led protests take over. New political polls put former IDF Chief Benny Gantz as the frontrunner against Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the annual Cybertech conference returns to Tel Aviv. The streets of Tel Aviv were brought to a near freeze on Wednesday afternoon as a scheduled protest against alleged police brutality and racism blocked major intersections and access routes. Scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. at the Azrieli Mall complex, thousands of primarily Ethiopian Israelis and their allies arrived early for an hours-long march that ended at Rabin Square by the Tel Aviv Municipality building. And eventually, tens of thousands of marchers poured into what became a mostly peaceful and very powerful rally.
Today we're protesting against the police brutality. We feel and see on the field that somehow we don't know the reason we call it racism, but our community are hurt.
Additionally, the protest leaders did have a permit, though not to block major junctions, which is what caused the extreme traffic. As for clashes with police, following protests in the past that had been marked with violence, protest organizers called for calm and civil behavior on the day of the march, and Tel Aviv police were likewise instructed beforehand to practice extreme caution when interacting with protesters.
Police units in Tel Aviv are on standby to respond to any types of incidents that could take place, disturbances or on any other scale, and that is after there is a demonstration taking place by the Ethiopian community. Prior to the demonstration, police units met with the leaders of the communities in order to make sure that the situation will be calm and quiet. Our units will respond to any incidents if they'll take place.
Unfortunately, though, at the end of the mostly peaceful event, around a dozen youths began clashing with police, throwing rocks, bottles, and burning garbage cans. 6 officers were injured and 11 protesters were arrested. Now, this rally was put together after 24-year-old Ethiopian-Israeli Yehuda Biadga was killed on January 18th in Bat Yam.
We are here today protest against violence about our community. Last week been killed by police, one of the Ethiopian Israeli adult killed by police. And today we are here to protest and to say no more violence against us. We are here. We had so many years of dreaming to be a part of the Israeli society, and today we are saying no more violence against us.
Biadga reportedly suffered from extreme post-traumatic stress disorder, which caused him to behave erratically. On the day of his death, police were called when Biadga was reportedly brandishing a knife in his building's stairwell before running with the knife into the street. And according to police, when the officer in question arrived, Biadga then charged towards him and refused calls to stop. So the officer, fearing for his life, responded with deadly force. Still, protesters say the officer could have aimed to incapacitate, as the military is trained to do, and the officer has been placed on leave while an investigation has been opened. Further, this is far from the only alleged incident of police abuse or discrimination. That's why for many, this protest is a long time coming. And finally, in response to Biadga's death and in order to regain public trust, Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan has now also launched a project to equip all police in Tel Aviv with body cameras as soon as possible. Top officials in the United States intelligence community are now warning Israel that the risks behind continued airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria may not be worth the reward. Speaking to a congressional hearing on Tuesday as part of an annual worldwide threat assessment, United States Director of National Intelligence Dan Coats explained that Iran seeks to avoid a major armed conflict with Israel, but Israeli strikes that result in Iranian casualties increase the likelihood of Iranian conventional retaliation against Israel. In fact, Coats added that the hundreds of reported IDF strikes in Syria over the past few years haven't had much of any deterrent effect on Iranian investment in the region anyway, saying that, quote, Iran continues to pursue permanent military bases and economic deals in Syria and probably wants to maintain a network of Shia foreign fighters there despite Israeli attacks, end quote. These sentiments were also echoed the day before by Israeli President Reuven Rivlin while speaking to a conference in Tel Aviv. But doing nothing to stop Iran from encroaching on the border is not an option that the government is willing to consider. Netanyahu and his security staff have all maintained that Israel will do whatever necessary to prevent Iran from reaching its widely publicized goal of wiping Israel off the map. To that end, Israel has also then been holding meetings with Russian envoys for Syrian affairs. Russia-Israel ties have been strained since September when Syrian air defenses shot down a Russian aircraft following Israeli strikes. But Moscow has continued to support Israel's right to self-defense, and Israeli military leaders have also indicated that only Russia is capable of completely removing Iran from Syria. Along the northern Gaza border, around 1,000 rioters were counted on Tuesday evening as violent clashes and riots against Israeli forces across the fence continued. And roughly 14 Palestinians were reportedly shot and injured, one critically, as the demonstrators threw stones and attempted to damage or otherwise breach the barrier. Additionally, a smaller group of protesters near the crowds by Israel's Zikim beach set off towards the naval border in an attempt to breach Israel's naval blockade. Around 20 boats set off from the shore before being turned around by Israeli vessels. However, none of this has seemingly deterred the Gazans' protesters.
ما دام هناك احتلال لقطاع غزة وحصار بحري على قطاع غزة سيستمر هذه الفعاليات وستتطور هذه الفعاليات يوما عن يوم حتى يحقق الشعب الفلسطيني ما يطلبه وما يتمنى. نحن شعب يتطوقون للحرية. الاحتلال الصهيوني يغلق جميع المعابر على قطاع غزة من بحرها وبرها. هذه المسيرات وهذه الفعاليات ستستمر ما دام الاحتلال يغلق على غزة. نحن متوقون أن نعود إلى أرضنا إلى حيفا ويافا.
Now, these so-called March of Return protests organized by the Hamas terror group in Gaza started back in March of 2018, and they've continued with thousands violently riding along the border every Friday and sporadically throughout the week. Also, protesters claim that, as the name suggests, they only want to be granted the right of return, which most interpret as meaning the right of return to lands that the Palestinian Authority would have encompassed behind the pre-1967 borders. But as stated just now, the true intent to take lands such as Haifa and Jaffa, which is in the south of Tel Aviv, are cities that under no circumstances or previous peace deals would have ever been given to Palestinian control. Now, as security forces deal with Gazan citizens riding across the Gaza-Israel border, Israeli Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan on Thursday prevented encroachment by the Palestinian Authority in Jerusalem by extending the closure of various Palestinian institutions. The decision comes via the recommendation of security experts and officials, and the order will limit the number of actions available to organizations like the PLO headquarters in East Jerusalem, the Palestinian Prisoners Club, and the East Jerusalem Chamber of Commerce. Erdan also explained the decision, saying that, quote, any attempt by the Palestinian Authority to gain a foothold in the territory of the State of Israel will be stopped immediately, end quote. That Israel will continue to act so that other countries in the world will recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and express this in practice by transferring their embassies to Jerusalem. Meanwhile, United States financial aid contributions towards Palestinian Authority security services are scheduled to end on Friday by the request of the Palestinian Authority, this to avoid massive losses in potential lawsuits. The threat of looming lawsuits came a number of weeks ago when ATCA, or the American Anti-Terrorism Cooperation Act, was passed. Under the new legislation, American courts would have expanded jurisdiction over any case and involving any foreign party accused of aiding or supporting terror, provided that that foreign party also accepts United States financial aid. This would mean that dozens of cases involving American victims and tens of millions of dollars in damages could be brought against the Palestinian Authority and the PLO and tried successfully in American courts. Therefore, PA negotiator Cybertech explained to the AFP in Ramallah that the PA doesn't want any money if it will put them in court. He also rejected claims that the PA may be looking for a workaround where they can get the money through other American channels. In the day after his campaign launching speech, former IDF Chief of Staff Benny Gantz and his new Israel Resilience Party have jumped tremendously in the polls. In fact, according to Judicial TV News and Channel 13, if Israel Resilience continues as a lone party, Wednesday's poll results awards them a minimum of 21 seats in the Knesset to the Likud's 30. And if Gantz were to lead a unity party with Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid faction, the poll projects that they would actually win, with 35 seats to the Likud's 30. That being said, the reverse was not as true. According to the results, if Lapid were to head that same unity bloc with Gantz, their joint faction would come up short with 30 parliament mandates to the Likud's 31. All the other remaining parties polled at 7 mandates or below. Many didn't even cross the minimum threshold. Therefore, the news reports concluded by predicting that more alliances and cooperative deals will likely occur between now and April elections. And the Chadashot News surveyed over 500 respondents and had a margin of error of 4.4%. Channel 13 polled over 750 respondents. Channel 13 polled over 750 respondents and had a 3.7% margin of error. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been taking out multiple campaign ads against his competition, including against Gantz, who he calls a weak leftist in a video posted to social media earlier this week. Though in 2011, at a time that Gantz was still active in the military, Prime Minister Netanyahu called him an excellent officer who played a central role in Israel's leadership and was owed a great deal of thanks. Also, Netanyahu and the Likud aren't the only ones who've been a bit blown back by these latest polls. For example, Finance Minister Moshe Kachlon dismissed his party's poor polling results, while Yesh Atid party sources continue to support their head, Yair Lapid, as the only politician capable of running against Netanyahu. Finally, Labour Party activists reportedly reacted to Gantz's opening speech with despair, following the Labour Party's failure to recover from splitting up the Zionist Union with Tzipi Livni's Hatnuah party. According to a new poll conducted by the Israeli Movement for Governability and Democracy, or Meshilut, it seems as though a majority of the Israeli public is now convinced that legal and judicial officials in Israel hold a left-leaning bias. The survey sampled 621 people and was conducted in partnership with the Rafi Smith Institute. And the results are shocking to say the least. Apparently, as many as 70% of respondents believe that the Supreme Court President Esther Chayut, Attorney General Mandelblit, Deputy Attorney General Zilber, and State Attorney Shai Nitzan, among others, are all biased to the left. And joining me now to discuss the implications of these results is attorney, public diplomacy expert, and lecturer Ran Bar Yoshafat. Ran, thank you so much for coming back in today.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, so, where do you place the blame, if there is blame to be placed for these figures, for these results?
I think that it's not a matter of pointing fingers. The thing is that Israel doesn't have a constitution. One of the chapters that's missing in our constitution is describing the relationship between the legislative branch and the judicial branch. Mm-hmm. What we see now is that the judicial branch interferes in the legislation process. And in Israel, usually the public votes to the right, but sometimes the policies seem to be not really going the way that our elected representatives have hoped for. And the main reason would be the Supreme Court and or the legal advisors. So I think that the 70% is not a real surprise. And in order to solve it, we need to decide as a society, how do you want to have this balance to be? And I just want to go on with this point. I always ask my friends from the more far left, I'll tell them, if the Supreme Court would have 15 Supreme Court judges who are all right-wing settlers, would you still want the Supreme Court to have so much power like it does now? And they're always saying, no, of course not. So basically they're saying we're happy with the Supreme Court.
On the other foot.
Yeah, and what I argue is that we need to have a system that is fair if you're in the coalition or the opposition.
But again, for the sake of argument, in the United States, for example, when you have a judicial system that is meant to balance the power in the United States government, in Israel, isn't it doing that to a degree, by interpreting laws and saying, hey, you can or cannot do this?
So I would argue that the most progressive American would say the Israeli judicial system is crazy. America had their Marbury versus Madison. We don't have that because we don't have a constitution. Right now, the Israeli Supreme Court is going to talk about the nation-state law and going to say if it's constitutional or not, which is like saying the Supreme Court of America is going to see if the Constitution in America is constitutional. So there's a problem here that the Supreme Court, in a sense, is instead of being a body that's supposed to do its checks and balances, it is the body that basically sets the tone of everything. And in my opinion, that's not democratic. Now, I'm really opposing those who say we need to take a bulldozer and destroy the Supreme Court. That's really far from my attitude. Sure. But to think that there's a group of people who are wiser than the rest of the public, so if they say something, then all of the public's decisions should be canceled, that's not democracy. Okay,
so what does this mean then in terms of faith in public discourse in the democratic process, in the judicial system? What are the implications of that on again, just faith and participation in the public system?
Well, I think we would all love to live in a society where people believe in the judicial branch and also in the legislative branch and the police and so on and so forth. The Supreme Court has 56 or 57, whatever, family members that until the past elections would de facto nominate themselves because of the committee that nominates the judges. You cannot touch their salary, you cannot fire them. I think it's very good that the public is also having a more suspicious attitude towards the Supreme Court because it's healthy for citizens to have some sort of suspicious attitude towards the government. And in that, I include the judicial branch. But I do think that in order for us to solve these conflicts, we need to have better understanding of how we balance the legislative branch and the judicial branch.
And how can that be done?
Another basic law, which will be basic law legislation. And I do know that the current Minister of Justice, Ayelet Shaked, she plans to do this on the next term. If you ask me, once we have that, basically Israel can have a constitution because if you'll put all of the basic laws and the one that sets the norms between the different branches, then we have basically everything you need in order to have a constitution.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting if we ever get there. Let's hope for the best. Ran, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
In other news, Prime Minister Netanyahu is reportedly scheduled to return to India for his second trip to the country in just a little over a year. Neither the Prime Minister's office nor India's embassy in Israel have commented on this itinerary, though. But an unnamed source reportedly told the Press Trust of India News that Netanyahu, quote, will be in India only for a day on February 11th, and a meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been confirmed. Other details are being worked out, end quote. Now, this announcement also comes 2 weeks after Israeli National Security Advisor Meir Ben Shabbat traveled to India to meet with Prime Minister Modi as well. And at the meeting, the two reportedly discussed bilateral relations, regional issues, security, trade, technology, and economic cooperations. Additionally, Netanyahu's allegedly scheduled trip follows local media reports about India's Air Force acquiring 15 Harop attack drones developed by Israel Aerospace Industries. The ANI News in India reported that a proposal to acquire these attack drones is expected to be discussed by the Defense Ministry at a high-level meeting in the coming week to strengthen the fleet of such drones in the Air Force. And the 2-meter-long and 3-meter-wide UAVs carry a payload of 23 kilograms of explosives, and they're designed to find and hover above targets before destroying them. Otherwise, the drones return to base intact, and it can be launched from land or sea and at any angle. In a joint letter published by The Guardian on Tuesday, dozens of artists and creatives in the UK called on the BBC broadcaster to boycott the Eurovision 2019 song competition and to try to have it moved from Tel Aviv, saying the BBC is, quote, bound by its charter to champion freedom of expression for the Palestinians as well. Well, the BBC has since responded to the open call for boycott by rejecting both the letter's claims and its demands. A statement released by the BBC explained that Eurovision is not a political event and does not endorse any political message or campaign. Therefore, since the competition has always supported the values of friendship, inclusion, tolerance, and diversity, the BBC does not believe it would be appropriate to use its participation in the event for political reasons. The statement then added that anyway, quote, the host country is determined by the rules of the competition, not the BBC, end quote. Still, several international pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel organizations have been answering and spreading the call to boycott.
The Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, or BDS, movement for Palestinian rights has called for a boycott of the Eurovision contest in Tel Aviv because we see it as art washing, whitewashing through arts. Israel's decades-old regime of military occupation, apartheid, and settler colonialism.
Additionally, many of the undersigned do represent powerful voices in the cultural world, including Vivienne Westwood, Peter Gabriel, and of course Roger Waters. Israel, however, along with the other nations participating in Eurovision, seem more excited than worried. And Israel's 2018 Eurovision winner, Netta Barzilai, again extended an open hand of peace to any who want to join in.
I believe in a protest. It's okay. I don't believe in boycotting. Eurovision is a European contest. It's not Israel. It's a worldwide thing. We are taking part. I encourage other people to come and take part.
And finally, just in case of disruption, Israeli officials have also explained now that they plan to exercise the right to counter BDS with blocked entries.
Israel is fully aware that anti-Israeli BDS activists will try to disrupt the Eurovision. We have the full authority to make sure that people whose purpose is to harm the state of Israel will not be able to enter our territory. Every country in the world has the same right, and we are going to exercise it with caution. We will open our doors to all as long as those people do not come here as enemies.
Moving on, as of Monday this week, Interior Minister Aryeh Deri has reportedly granted temporary residency status to Hapoel Jerusalem basketball player and sports legend Amari Stoudemire. Additionally, Deri said that the Interior Ministry would consider in the near future granting Stoudemire full citizenship rights in light of his contributions to Israel and his impressive career. As a former NBA All-Star, Stoudemire moved to Israel a few years ago, and he's been playing with Hapoel Jerusalem since 2016. He's also part owner of the team and helped Hapoel win the Israeli championships. Then in April of 2018, he announced the start of his official conversion process to Judaism. To that end, Stoudemire has already been practicing Jewish customs and observes Jewish holidays. He also claims to be descended of the Hebrew Israelites, a group of African Americans who identify as biblical Jews. And in light of all this, Minister Deri acknowledged that he had read about Stoudemire and truly believes his honest and true wishes to settle in Israel. After its incredibly successful reception in 2018, the 2019 annual Cybertech conference in Tel Aviv has returned, and over 15,000 listeners, 170 speakers, 200 companies, and many more were in attendance. Well, ILTV's Lidar Gavelazi was also fortunate enough to get into the conference this year for a first-hand look at one of the world's top events in cybertech and securities. This ahead of the premiere of her amazing new show, ILTV's Innovation Israel. Let's take a look.
So what Cyberbee does, we've created the cyber training and innovation centers that we are building around the world, allowing people to go and learn how to be a cybersecurity professional and have actually a profession. And also help organizations who already have cybersecurity people that need to go through training on a yearly basis.
So I'm here with Gilad Perry from Triple Cyberness. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, so in Triple Cyber, we actually developed a very interactive awareness training, employee awareness training on using virtual reality.
Can I try it?
Of course, we'll be happy to let you try it.
Let's go, let's try. So I'm going to try virtual reality cyber training. Let's see. We see a really long line for your booth, so why don't you tell us a little bit about Cybereason?
So Cybereason is an Israeli cybersecurity company. We help large organizations, big enterprise, and governmental organizations to protect themselves against the emerging threats of cyber.
And so how do you do that?
So we're deployed inside the organization. So we collect a lot of information that is coming from the normal activity of the employees of the company, of the servers that are part of the infrastructure of the company. And we're able to analyze this huge amount of data to determine when something goes wrong, when a malicious actor is starting doing things and trying to get to their targets, basically. And we detect that, and we also provide the information that allows our customers to respond and remediate the attack. So hopefully we can do all of that in a very fast time before any damage is done.
We, as the National Cyber Directorate, we take a good look of these technologies and how to broaden the definition of cybersecurity in order to mitigate with all these new attack surfaces.
This revolution that you're seeing from 2007 to 2017 is a revolution that is changing our world both economically and in terms of security. I think it'll also change our politics. And what it is basically the meeting ground between big data, IT, and connectivity. Everything is being driven from this nexus. Everything. For example, new industries are being formed. What's the first new industry that's being formed? It's right here in this room. It's the cybersecurity industry. Israel is 0.1% of the world's population, and we are receiving 20% of the global share in private cybersecurity investments. That's 200 times our weight in the world. What this revolution is doing, big data, AI, and connectivity, is allowing small countries to be big countries.
Well, I hope you enjoyed a sneak peek into the Cybertech Conference Tel Aviv. Until next time.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day, with all the amazing new programming set to premiere soon on ILTV, like Innovation Israel with Lidar Gavelazi, today's word is bechora, meaning premiere. Now, when a new show or play has its opening night, you can call that a hatzagat or hofa'at bechora, meaning the premiere show. And bechora or premiere can also refer to people, as in someone running in first place, or bechora in a race, or maybe even the firstborn child, or a yeled bechora. Whatever it is, there are always pros and cons to being bechora. For example, it's true that the early bird, or hatzipor bechora, gets the worm, but it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy and cool with a low of 49 or 9 degrees Celsius. Then over the weekend, you can expect clear to partly cloudy skies and little change in temperatures. The high should be about 67 or 19 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.65 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.